Many of us have big, distant goals. Some of us want to run our first marathon or break 3 hours in the marathon or run our first ultra or finish a 100-miler. These distant goals captivate us because we have a deep belief in our potential. But many of us will never reach these goals, not because we lack the ability, but because we refuse to change. We refuse to change our diet or our race day nutrition or incorporate strength training or speed work or zone 2 training into our workout routine so that we can achieve those goals. And so, is potential just another fancy word for never-ending procrastination? Or do we relish the idea of being able to achieve a goal rather than actually trying to achieve it? Think about a goal that you've wanted to achieve for a really long time. What do you actually gain by never trying to actually achieve the goal? I think a huge part of this is comfort. We get to remain comfortable because when we live in the realm of potential, we get to avoid the discomfort of self-reflection and the difficulty of actually making meaningful change. All while we're able to tell ourselves that we are capable of achieving so much more without ever actually having to chase it. We get to remain comfortable with how things are, even while we tell ourselves that we have potential to be so much more. I think that feels good psychologically because you get to avoid the hard parts of change, while at the same time focusing on your potential. And when you focus on your potential in the future, it's like you get to reap the benefits, the psychological benefits of change without actually having to do anything. I recently read a book about Adlerian Psychology, and this is what got me thinking about this concept about how so many of us say we want to change, but how rare it is that someone actually makes meaningful change. Alfred Adler, where Adlerian Psychology comes from, he was a contemporary of both Freud and Carl Jung. And one of the central concepts to his psychology was this idea that we want to change, but we won't change because we don't really want to change. His concept was that we have a subconscious goal of always remaining the same and avoiding change, because change is hard. Adler found that early in life, people develop these unconscious strategies for navigating the world, heavily influenced by feelings of inferiority, whether they're real or perceived. He calls these unconscious strategies guiding fictions. A guiding fiction is essentially the story that you tell yourself, both about the past and about the current moment. And what's so important about these stories that we tell ourselves is that they dictate our behavior and determine our life direction. The problem is that these guiding fictions, they prioritize safety and risk avoidance above all else because they were created at a young age when we were vulnerable. These subconscious guiding fictions are so powerful that we develop lifelong fears and anxieties that were initially designed to help us stay psychologically safe, because at that time we were psychologically vulnerable. So that's why we have things like fear of public speaking, social anxiety, fear of failure, fear of rejection, and general risk aversion. So we have these grand goals and we see ourselves to be someone that has great potential, but yet we have a subconscious goal of never trying, and we have subconscious fears and anxieties that will make sure that that never happens. When I read this, it hit me like a ton of bricks because I immediately saw it in myself. When I was first married, my wife and I were hanging out with a bunch of other friends, and we were playing that newlywed game. If you don't know, the newlywed game is where you ask couples that are married questions that they should know about each other. Like, what is your partner's biggest pet peeve? Or what is their favorite candy or their favorite color or something like that? And so when it was our turn, they asked my wife what my biggest fear was. And so I wrote down the answer to the question, and then she gave her answer. And to my surprise and satisfaction, she got it right. I had written down failure. And I was proud. I was proud that my wife knew me well enough that she knew that I was incredibly scared of failure. And I was also proud that it wasn't something stupid like spiders or scared of the dark or something. But little did I know, especially at that age, that a fear of spiders would have been monumentally less detrimental to me than my fear of failure. Because despite my apparent awareness of my fear of failure, it continued to rule my subconscious. Because you see, my fear of failure was directly tied to my feeling of self-worth. My self-worth was achievement-based. As silly as it sounds, when I qualified for Boston in 2013, it was not for me. It was for everyone else. It was so that I could prove that I was worthy to be in their lives. And I'm not exaggerating in this. My self-worth was directly tied to how fast I could run. And I know, looking back, that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I mean this with absolute sincerity, that I could not detach my achievements from my self-worth. And that also came with failure. When I failed, I was replaceable. When I failed, I was worthless. And so that is why my fear of failure was so disastrous for my life, because it affected my marriage, it affected my career, it affected my running. Sure, I was able to qualify for Boston, but it was out of sheer force of will, not from strategic training. I collapsed at the finish line in 2013, and I was in the medical tent after because I was stubborn and I was unwilling to admit that my training plan was off and make the change, make the sacrifice to run well. So instead, I ran myself into the ground. Okay, so we've established that we have problems. Now, what do we do about it? This is where Adler diverted away from Freud. And the beauty of Adlerian psychology is twofold. So first, it helps us wake up. I think one of our biggest purposes in this life is to wake up, to make the subconscious conscious, to not live life in the passenger seat, but to take the wheel and take charge of our life. Because so often we remain asleep, we remain basically unconscious and allow our subconscious thoughts and desires to overtake our life. And so that's the first one. The second part of Adlerian psychology emphasizes the need for courage and ownership. Adler makes the case that you hold all of the cards. In Adlerian psychology, the past is subconsciously interpreted to serve the story that you're telling yourself. It's as if the past isn't real. It's not denying that it happened, but it's realizing and understanding that your subconscious self selected and reframed it in a way that allows you to keep your current strategy intact, your current guiding fiction intact. And that strategy is generally to remain the same. Our subconscious goal is to not change. Taking this concept and applying it elsewhere, like in Christianity, it feels very similar to the faith versus works idea. That faith without works is dead. If you have a belief but you don't act on it, what's the point? And that's very similar to this idea of potential but never being willing to make that change. The biggest parallel, I think, is Stoicism. In Stoicism, the obstacle is the way. If you have a fear of failure, there's your obstacle. That is the way. In Eastern traditions, there isn't a lot to say on this subject because the way that they define the self takes this topic in a whole different direction. So I won't go that way. So ask yourself, do you really want to change? Or do you just want to believe that you're trying? Because the cruel irony for me in my life is that my fear of failure was actually guaranteeing failure. Because by never fully committing to my goals, whether in running or my career or in my relationships, I was failing by default. I was choosing the certainty of comfort of living in the fantasy of potential over the difficulty and risk of actually attempting to become who I could be. So back to the goal that you said that you had for so long and you haven't really made any progress on it, whether that's in running or in life. How are your subconscious fears and anxieties keeping you from making that first step to achieving that goal that you've had for so long? Arguably, the first step is recognizing this pattern and then breaking it. Because once you see how your subconscious goals are sabotaging your conscious goals, you can finally start to make the change that you need to make in order to understand the game that you're playing with yourself between your conscious and your subconscious. As I look back on the changes that I've made in my life, they fall into two categories. One, changes that have happened to me, and changes that I have made happen. And the common denominator in those is that my guiding fiction, or the story that I tell myself about those things, changed. And that allowed for me to make meaningful change in my life. And so I guess the real question is, what needs to change in the story that you tell yourself? What's holding you back in the story that you tell yourself? Because like I said, Adlerian psychology focuses on ownership and courage, facing that story, taking ownership over it, and making the necessary change. As always, I'm not an expert in this, and I'm definitely not an expert in Adlerian psychology. This is based off of one book. The book's name is The Courage to be Disliked. And I'm not saying that Adler was right. I'm more just exploring this topic. And as always, I'm hoping that this is thought-provoking or at least interesting. So if it was, I hope you'll stick around, and I'll catch you in the next video. All right, gear for today, we've got Ogden-made running hat, and then a shirt from Lululemon. This is old, there's no way they make it anymore. And then I've got, these shorts are from 10,000, and then Stance running socks, Mount to Coast T1s. I have a review coming out on these soon. I'll probably record it sometime this week. So if you have any questions in the meantime on the gear, let me know. Also, it has come to my attention that some people think I'm pushing gear. I'm not pushing gear. I'm not affiliated with any brands at all. I'm just sharing gear that I use because as a runner, I would like to know what other runners are running in. So it's just for fun. Anyways, thanks.